Okay, welcome back to some more fun with math. In this video we're going to look at some ideas behind multiplication, division, and operation or order of operation with integers. And then we're also going to be able to look at doing the order of operations with your fractions. So, first and foremost, we need to look at what does it mean when we multiply two numbers together. So there's a few rules that we like to follow that help make the idea behind multiplying a little bit easier. First, and keep in mind we are dealing with two real numbers for this, is that if you have the same signs, then your answer is always positive. But if you have different signs, the answer is always negative. Okay? Now, if we are talking about more than 2, so here we're looking at multiplying more than 2. So we're talking about multiplying 3 values, 4 values, 5 numbers, etc. Then the rules are as follows. If you have an even number of negative signs, then the answer is positive. But if you have an odd number of negative signs, the answer is negative. Okay? So, more than 2 values, we end up changing our rule ever so slightly, and the rule becomes reflective on how many negative signs do we have. So the way that it kind of works, if you're going to do your multiplication, is you're going to multiply your numbers first, and then you're going to look at how many negative signs you have. Do you fit into your first category where you only had 2 numbers, or are you fitting into your second category where we had more than 2 numbers? Okay. So for example, I have the numbers 6 and 8. Now, I know way back in the dinosaur time when I went to school, we were taught little rhymes. For example, 6 and 8 went on a date and they came back with 48. Okay? Pretty simple, means that I can obviously multiply without a calculator. However, the longer that I have taught and the more students that I've had, every time I mention that little mathematical rhyme, I am finding that more and more students have no idea what I'm talking about, which means clearly math that I was taught is being approached differently nowadays. So, one of the things that tends to happen a lot is that we have a high reliance on calculators. When you are dealing with math at this level, the more times that you can practice without a calculator, the stronger you're going to become, and the easier things are going to be for yourself. The more heavily you rely on that calculator, the tougher things are in terms of math. It becomes harder and harder to follow along the basic structures of what you're supposed to do. I recommend not using a calculator because, let's face it, when we're talking about this type of math, some students, or for a lot of students, most instructors make you go calculator free. I know I'm one of them. I like to make my students go calculator free as often as possible. So that being said, little phrases like 6 and 8 went on a date and they came back with 48 can help. And so of course you can take any 2 numbers and create any phrases that you want. But I would highly suggest at this stage in math that not only do you do some calculator work, but you definitely try and work without it, beefing up your skills. So, getting back to multiplying. Since I've already now told you, like a few times, that 6 and 8 will multiply and give you 48, once you know what the value is, so we know this to be 48, you have to look at how many negative signs do we have? Well, first of all, I only have 2 numbers. So I'm going to fall in my original rule here. And the rule says, if you have the same signs, the answer is positive. But if you have opposite signs, the answer is negative. Here I've got my 2 terms, but notice I have opposite signs. Because they're opposite signs, my answer is negative. Now, looking at my second example, first of all, I'm going to look at how many terms I have. Well, I only have 2, so again I'm going to fall into my top category. I then am going to figure out what the sign of my result should be. So I have negative and negative. So that falls under my first rule. If you have the same signs, then your answer is positive. So my answer here is going to be a positive. So then I just simply have to do 9 times 5. So 9 times 5 is 45. And therefore, because it's positive, I don't have to attach anything to it. Now here, this one is an interesting one. First of all, we fall under my second rule because here I have 1, 2, 3 terms. So I fall under the second rule here for more than 2. And it says if you have an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. If you have an odd number, the answer is negative. So I have only 1 negative sign. That tells me I have an odd number of negative signs. So I might assume my answer was positive. However, this one's a trick question because one of the terms I'm multiplying by is 0. And the rule says 0 times anything gives 0 as a result. Therefore, because of that, it means my answer for this one is 0, and since 0 is neither positive nor negative, there's no sign attached. Okay? So pay very close attention to make sure that you catch any of these trick questions you may see, because let's face it, all students believe that their instructors love the trick questions. Now, I will verify that is actually true. My favorite thing to do is put trick questions into my tests. But it's all going to depend on, say, who you're getting lessons from. So just pay attention is my biggest hint. Now, I've got a couple more examples here of straight multiplying before we move into the basics behind order of operations. And so here, again, you want to look at how many terms do you have. So I have 1, 2, 3 terms. It means I fall under the rule of 2 or more. And in this case, I have 1, 2 negative signs. So if you remember, that rule said, if you have an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. So in this case, I have 2 negative signs, so my answer is positive. 2 times 1 is 2 times 3 gives me 6. Now over here I have 4 terms, which still falls into the category of 2 or more than 2. So one of the things that I would do to make life easy is I would multiply my first 2 terms and then maybe multiply my back 2 terms. So here I have 4 times a negative 1. Well, that's going to give me a negative 4. Why? Because I'm multiplying the 2 terms together and I have a negative, which means my result is negative. Now if I look at the back 2 terms, I have negative times negative, which means I have the same sign, therefore this becomes a positive, and 2 times 3 is 6. So this is 6. And now I need to do it again. I have 2 terms here, and I have an opposite sign, so my sign is negative, and then 4 times 6 is 24. Now these last two examples, as you can see, are fractions. And so I wanted to be able to also give some examples on how you would do multiplying when you have fractions. So the rule with fractions is you will multiply straight across the numerator and place in the numerator and then straight across the denominator and place in the denominator. Okay. So using that rule, I have to be able to multiply these together. So first and foremost, I have negative and negative. That's two negatives on a two-term multiplication, so they go away and become a positive. Now I have to do straight across the top, or numerator, and place it in the numerator. So this is going to be 3 times 6 in my numerator. Then I have to go straight across the bottom, and that's going to be a 4 times 7. So in this case, I'm now going to multiply these two together. So this is going to be 3 times 6 gives you 18, and 4 times 7 gives you 28. After you do that, you must reduce, reduce, reduce. So if we're looking at 18 and 28, one thing that's in common there is going to be a 2. So if I divided 2 out of both of them, that is going to leave me with a 9 over 14. And thus, I've finished that multiplication. Now the same rule is going to apply to this other one, but notice instead of a 2-term, it's a 3-term. So we have to follow the negative rules that are set forth with your more than 2-term examples, and they say if you have an even number of negative signs, the answer is positive. So I have 1, 2 negative signs. 2 is an even number. Therefore, this answer is positive. So to do that, says, again, straight across the numerator. So this is going to be 5 times 14 times 6. And straight across the denominator, which is 2 times 9 times 5. Well, 5 times 14 times 6 is going to give you 420. 2 times 9 times 5 is going to give you 90. And then we need to reduce. So the first thing that I would look at is that both of these numbers end in 0, which automatically means you have divisibility by 10 using a divisibility rule. And so that says that this is going to reduce down to 42 over 9. And if you look at 42 and 9, they can be reduced down even further because 42 and 9 have 3 in common. So if I divide a 3 out of top and bottom, I'm left with 14 over 3. And thus, this is my lowest, most reduced term. And so that would be the answer that we were looking for. Okay. Now all of those are examples of multiplying. Now let's look at dividing. Dividing is going to use the same generic rules as multiplying with two numbers. In other words, if your numerator and your denominator are both negative, then your result is positive. If, however, either your numerator or your denominator is negative, your result is negative. So in this first one, notice I have one negative sign. It's in my numerator. That means my result here is going to be negative. And then 30 divided by 2 gives you 15. If you're not comfortable with that, please make sure that you are using that basic calculator to do your work, the basic scientific calculator. Now over here on the second one, I have a negative over negative, which means my result is positive, and 28 over 4 gives me 7. Okay. Where things become a little bit fun is when I have fraction divided by fraction. So what we have to remember here is we have to remember the rule, and the rule says you're going to keep the first, you are going to change to multiplication, and you are going to flip the reciprocal of the second. When I was growing up, we called it keep it, change it, flip it. I've heard, or it still seems to be a very popular phrase, but the grown-up edition says that you are going to simply multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. In other words, we are going to keep this fraction the same. We are going to change this to multiplication, and we are going to flip the reciprocal here. So we're going to flip it. Flip it is kind of like making a handstand. It means instead of putting your feet on the ground and your head in the air, you flip yourself around so that your head is on the ground and your feet is in the air. So here we're going to do just that. So we're going to go ahead and keep it. So this is negative 3/5. We're going to change the sign to multiplication, and then we're going to flip the reciprocal of the back term, which says we're now going to multiply this by a negative 10 over 9. Now, one thing that we know is that negative and negative are going to go away and leave it positive. So this is 3/5 times 10 over 9. And if I look, I have a couple things that are in common. So here, if I look at this diagonal, I have a 10 on top and a 5 on bottom. So that means they each get to go away. 5 becomes a 1, and 10 becomes a 2. So that is going to change this to being 3 over 1 times 2 over 9. Now, my luck, I get to do it on the other side. So that side now says I have a 3 and a 9. 3 and 9 are in common, so 3 goes away and 9 becomes 3. Thus leaving me with the end result of 2 over 3. And this is what I was looking for. So again, I can do it a second time. I'm going to keep the first, so negative 9 over 14, change it to multiplication, and flip the reciprocal of the second, which makes it 35 over 54. Again, just like before, I have terms in common. So here 9 and 54 go into each other. This becomes a 1 and this becomes a 6. So what I actually have is I have negative 1 over 14 times 35 over 6. And what's exciting is my other side reduces as well. So I've got 14 and 35. I can divide both of those by 7, leaves a 2 in the bottom and a 5 on top, thus giving me the fractions negative 1 over 2 times 5 over 6. Remember, the rules say we're going to go straight across the top and straight across the bottom, so 1 times 5 is going to give you a negative 5. 2 times 6 is going to give you 12. And thus, that is my result. Now the big one that I want to look at is called order of operations. Order of operations is essentially what's better known as Pemdas. Now, Pemdas, please excuse me, dear aunt, this is where things get fun. When I was growing up, it was Sarah, dear Aunt Sarah. However, I've learned through previous students that some call it Sally, some call it Stephanie. I've heard lots of different S names and phrases. And so what I've realized is that please excuse me, dear aunt stays the same, which I found to be kind of funny. It's just the name of the aunt that changes. So what I always like to say when trying to remember Pemdas is this. Please excuse me, dear aunt something. When we're talking about Pemdas, the P stands for parentheses. It stands for the very first thing that you have to do, which is your parentheses. After doing parentheses, you have to look at E, which is exponents. And you would evaluate your exponents. When you're done with exponents, the thing that most students forget is that multiplication division is a thing and addition subtraction is a thing. So after you have done parentheses and exponents, you are then going to complete any multiplication or division in order starting from left to right. So it doesn't matter if the division came first or the multiply came first. What matters is that you start from the leftmost side and work your way to the right. Okay? You do that same idea with addition and subtraction. You use all addition and subtraction and you work from left to right. And then the name of the game when you're done with all of that is to simplify, simplify, simplify. As far as you can, constantly, constantly, constantly. You need to always get down to the smallest, most result possible. So let's look at some examples here. If I look at this first one, I've got a lot of stuff going on here. I have 16 times 3 divided by parenthesis 2 squared minus 5. So the first thing I have to be able to do is I have to simplify all parentheses. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that the first thing that I care about is inside these parentheses here. Could care less about the outside. So this is going to be 16 times 3 divided by. I have to simplify my parentheses, and in order to do that, it says I have to combine my terms here. That means I need to evaluate. 2 squared gives me 4 minus 5, and that would be my first step. Now, I still have a parentheses, so I still have to work with it. So this is still going to be 16 times 3 divided by. But in this case, 4 minus 5 is negative 1. So this is a negative 1. Now my parentheses are done, so now I can look and see if I have any remaining exponents, which I don't. So I can work my multiplication and division from left to right. So I'm going to start at my 16, and I'm going to travel it in this direction, and I'm going to look for any multiply or divide, no matter the order. Here I have 16 times 3, so I have to do that first. 16 times 3 is going to give me 48. Now this is divided by -1. The next thing I have to look at is, what do I have next? Well, I've got my negative sign, or my division sign here. So I'm going to do 48 divided by -1, and that gives me a -48. Since there's nothing else for me to do, that is my end result. Now let's look at another one that's a little bit more complicated. So I have 9 minus 6 times a whole bunch of junk. So I have to be able to figure out what comes first. So first says to simplify all parentheses, brackets, braces, or absolute values first. So I've got this big old bracket here. So this is going to be 9 minus 6 times. And so I have to be able to reduce first what is inside my brackets. So I've got -21 divided by 7 times 2. So this is -21 divided by 7 times 2, and then I have minus a negative, so plus 8. So now I need to keep going. So this is 9 minus 6, open my bracket. I have to look for any exponents. Well, I don't have any. Next, I'm looking for multiplication division. So I am only looking at inside the bracket here. So I'm going to start with my leftmost digit, and I'm going to travel along and look for the first multiply or divide I come to. And the first one I come to is going to be this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do -21 divided by 7. It's going to give me a -3, and then that's times 2 plus 8, and close it. I'm not done inside my bracket, so I have to keep going. This is 9 minus 6 times. And again, I'm going to start on this leftmost side, and I'm going to travel along to see if I have any more multiplication or division. And what you'll notice is that, again, these first two terms are multiplying. Therefore, this is what has to come next. -3 times -2 gives you a -6 plus 8. Sorry, that's a positive 2. Again, I still have my bracket, so I need to keep going. This is still 9 minus 6 times. And now I have -6 plus 8. And that is going to give me a positive 2. Well, what you need to remember here is that this between these two is a multiply. So therefore, I have nothing else in the brackets to do. So again, I'm going to start on my leftmost side, and I'm going to travel along until I find a multiply or divide. And in that case, I have it. So this is going to be 9 minus, and then 6 times 2 is 12. Again, I'm going to travel, and I have no more multiplication or division, which is when now you can switch over to addition subtraction. Starting with the left, I have 9 minus 2, so that is going to give me a -3 as a result. Okay. Alright, let's look at some more. Here I've got an absolute value, so I have to go ahead and do that first because it's on my leftmost side. So this is where I'm going to start, is by evaluating my absolute value here. So 16 minus 20 is going to leave me with the absolute value of -4. And then this is going to be times 32 divided by 13, the absolute value of 3 minus 5 minus 5 squared. I still have to evaluate here. Evaluating the absolute value of negative 4 is going to give me 4 as a result. So this is 4 times my stuff, which is 32 divided by the absolute value of 3 minus 5 minus 5 squared. Next thing I have to do again is still parentheses. So I've got this big old bracket thing here, and inside the bracket I've got another absolute value. So this is the next thing that I have to focus on. So I'm going to have 4 times, and this is 32 divided by 3 minus 5 gives you a negative 2. So this is the absolute value of negative 2. And then this is minus 5 squared. Evaluate my absolute value, and this is 4 times 32 divided by 2 minus 5 squared. In looking in this in this bracket, I have no more absolute values or parentheses, so I have to do my exponent. So this is now going to be 4 times, and it's my 32 divided by 2 minus 25. The next order would be your division. So this is 4 times 16 minus 25. 16 minus 25 is going to give you 4 times a negative 9. Again, you need to remember that this right here is to multiply. So 4 times negative 9 is going to give you a negative 36. And thus completed order of operations. This next one, notice I have a bunch of fractions. So your instinct is going to be to remove all your fractions, and you can't do that. The reason we don't want to do that is because we've got a bunch of operations between them, and I don't have an equal sign. Instead, I have to follow my rules. So I'm still just going to use the basics of order of operations here. First thing I come to is division. I don't have any parentheses, I don't have any exponents, so the first multiply divide I get to is coming from my division. So I'm going to look solely at these 2 fractions, and I'm going to leave the others alone. So this tells me again that I'm going to keep the first, change to multiplication, flip the reciprocal of what I had, and then the rest is going to just follow down. I then have to look for, again, any multiply and divide, so I'm still working with these first 2 right here. So I'm going to go straight across the top and straight across the bottom. So this is going to give me 2/3 minus 5/6 times 3/4. Again, I need to combine, and if I look, the next place I'm going to look for is right here, where I have another multiplication. So this is going to be 2/3 minus 5 times 3 is 15. 6 times 4 is 24. Now, the rule to add or subtract needs to have a common denominator. So here, when I am looking at a common denominator, I have 3 and I have 24. So my least common denominator here is going to be 24. So for my first fraction, the question is, how do I turn my 2/3 into something over 24? Well, 3 times 24 or 3 times 8 gives me 24. So this is 2 over 3 minus the 15 over 24. Multiply straight across. 8 times 2 is 16 minus 15. The whole thing is over 24. And 16 minus 15 is going to give me 1 over 24. And that is the end result. Let's look at another fraction here. So again, I'm looking for parentheses, and I've got one. And in doing so, this parentheses has this exponent. So I've got my exponents to look at. So the first thing is I have 3 over 4 divided by, and I've got this exponent here and the exponent there. So 3 squared is going to give me 9 minus 4 times, and then I'm going to square the top and the bottom. So 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 2 is 4. The next thing that I have to look at is my order of operations. So I don't have any more parentheses, I don't have any more exponents, so I need to look at multiply, divide. So to multiply, divide, I have this 3/4 here, and it is divided by 9. So that in itself says I have to keep the first, so this is 3/4, change to multiplication and flip the reciprocal, 1 over 9. And then this is going to be minus 4 times 9 over 4. I got to do my multiplying, so 3 times 1 is going to give me 3 over 9 and 4 is going to give me 36. And then this is minus 4 times 9 over 4. I can now do this multiplication. 4 over 4 is going to cancel, so these are going to go away and leave me with just straight ones. So this is going to be 3 over 36 minus 9. Again, I need to have a common denominator, and so here I would say when I'm talking about 36, that would be my common. So my LCD here would be 36, and the reason for that is because 9 can go into 36 easily. So for this, I'm going to have 3 over 36 minus 9 times 36. So this is going to be 324 over 36, which means I can do 3 minus my 324 is going to give me negative 321 over 36. Now I have to be able to see if this reduces at all. So in order to do that, remember, one of the easiest things to do is to take your smaller number and create its factor tree. So when I'm looking at 36, I'm looking at 1 and 36. I'm looking at 2 and 18, 3 and 12, and then I've got 4 and 9, and then 6 and 6. Okay, so sorry for running out of space. So I'm going to take all of these factors, and I'm going to see if any of them come out of 321. And I'm going to use my calculator to do that to make it easier. So I've got 321, so the first thing I may do is 321, and I may divide that obviously by 3. Why? Because it's not even, so I know 2 is not going to work. And when I do that, I get 107. So I can go ahead and reduce that down. And if I want to start there, I can. But I have a ton more that I can go through, so I would just take a quick second and look. If I looked at 4, notice I would get a decimal. 321 divided by 6 is also a decimal. If I divide it by 9, I still get a decimal. And then 12, 18, and 36 are not going to work because they're all even and my number here is odd. And whereas it's not always the case that you wouldn't get an odd number as a result, it's definitely a majority of the time. So when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at 3 being the only thing that I can reduce by. So in this case, when I divided my 3 out, I'm left with 107. Therefore, my reduced here is going to be negative 107 divided by 12. And that is my reduced answer. Now here's another one that I have. Again, in terms of parentheses, I don't really actually have any, but I do have a exponent, and so this is where I'm going to start. So here I've got negative 2/3 divided by 7 over 12 minus 2 over 7, and then this is going to be plus. And here, when we're talking about our exponent, this value here is going to apply to the 1, it's going to apply to the 2, and it's going to apply to the negative. So negative times negative is positive. 1 squared is a 1, 2 squared is a 4. I've got no other exponents, so I move on to the multiply divide. So the first thing I come to, left to right, is my first 2 terms. So this is going to be negative 2/3 times 12 over 7 minus 2 over 7 plus 1 over 4. When I'm looking at these, notice my diagonal here would reduce. So 3 and 12 would reduce. The bottom would become a 1, 12 would become a 4. And so this is really going to be negative 2 times 4, which is a negative 8 over 7, minus 2 over 7 plus 1 over 4. I don't have any other multiply divide, so I have to go ahead and go addition, subtraction, left to right. So negative 8 minus 2 is a negative 10 over 7 plus 1 over 4. Between 7 and 4, my least common denominator is 28. So in terms of 7, I have to multiply top and bottom by 4. So this becomes negative 40 over 28 plus, and then on this other side here, to turn 4 into 28, I got to multiply by 7. So this is 7 over 28. Negative 40 plus 7 is going to give me a negative 33 over 28, and thus I am reduced. Alright, and looking at a couple more, we have to do what's in the parentheses first. So here, first thing we need to do is we have to change to improper. So in this first parentheses, I'm going to have 5 over 8, and this is going to be plus. And then remember, to change to improper says you're going to take the bottom times the big number plus the top into the top. So 4 times 2 is 8 plus 1 is a 9, and then leave the bottom alone. This is being divided by 1 minus 1/4. So here I need to have a lowest common denominator, which is going to be 8. The way I turn 4 into 8 is I multiply by 2. So this is going to be 5 over 8 plus 18 over 8. And I'm going to divide this, and if I look at this other one, notice I can change 1 into 4 over 4 minus 1/4, because my LCD here was 4. Continuing to do the math in the parentheses, I have 5 plus 18, which is going to give me a 23 over 8, and I'm going to divide that. 4 minus 1 is a 3 over 4. I'm going to keep the first, 23 over 8, change to multiplication and flip the reciprocal, 4 over 3. First thing that I have is I have this 8 and 4 business. These both reduce, leaves me a 1 on top and a 2 on the bottom. And so here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go straight across the top. 23 times 1 is a 23. And then 2 times 3 is 6. Therefore, that is my most simplified answer. In attacking the next one, notice most of it is under a parentheses, but then I have a parenthesis inside. So here I have to open it up and I have to work my way out. So this is 15 times 5. I have to work inside this. So 2 cubed is 8. My negative holds, and I'm dividing by 10. So then this is going to become 15 plus 5. Negative 8 minus 7 is a negative 15, and divide this by 10. Here I need to now multiply, so this is going to be 15 minus 75, and divide it by 10. 15 minus 75 is a negative 60, and I'm going to divide it by 10. I'm going to keep the first, which is a negative 60, change to multiplication and flip the reciprocal, makes it 1 over 10. One thing that we can remember is that this is the same as saying 60 over 1. Obviously the ones are going to cancel and go away. What I'm looking at here is I have 60 over 10. Both of these end in 0. So this becomes a 1 and this becomes a 6. Thus making my result negative 6. Now another way that we can approach this is we can approach this through what's called find the average. The average says you are going to sum up all the terms and then divide by the number of terms added. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means I have to figure out my fraction. So I'm going to sum the terms, goes in the numerator, and then this is going to be the number of terms added in the denominator. So to sum the terms says I'm going to do 2/3 plus 5/8 plus 1/2. The number of terms added would be the number of terms I have. So 1, 2, 3 terms means I got to divide by 3. So if I want to rewrite this into the order of operations I was doing, I would rewrite this by saying that I have 2/3 plus 5/8 plus 1/2 is divided by 3. So the first thing that we have to look at is summing my terms. And I need to have a least common denominator or a common denominator. So my LCD here is going to be 24. And one of the ways that I got that is 3 times 8 is 24, and does 2 go into it? Yes, it does, so we're good to go. So how do I turn 3 into 24? I multiply by 8. So I have 8 times 2 is going to give me 16 over 24, plus turning 8 into 24 says multiply by 3, so this becomes 15 over 24, plus, and then 2 into 24 is 12, so this is going to be 12 over 24, and we're going to divide by 3. So let's take this up to here. 16 plus 15 plus 12 gives you 43 divided by 24, and this whole thing is divided by 3. So I'm going to keep the first, 43 over my 24. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of the number, 1 over 3. And in this case, this is going to give me 43 over 72. Okay. So that is essentially everything you would need to know in terms of order of operations with fractions and integers. Be sure, if you do have any questions, that you let me know. And if not, then remember, math is bananas, so just keep smiling, ask tons of questions, have fun with all of your math, and most of all, I will see you next time.